I want to talk about Flint, Michigan. We want to talk. I just talked about a story that doesn't get a ton of that's not going to get a ton of attention in certain quarters. Flint, Michigan, in the United States, is an example of that. Now, Flint, Michigan, when the whole story really became big a couple years ago, it was a big news story in some areas of the corporate media. Specifically, I have to give a shout out. I think Rachel Maddow has, I don't want to say fallen off, but I think she's lost sight of a few things, because since Trump has been in office, she's been on the Russia bandwagon. Okay, heavy. Okay, but she, giving kudos to her, she talked about the Flint water crisis more than most people in the corporate media. Okay, a lot of people didn't talk enough about it, and the story didn't stay in the media long enough. So, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the story, let me bring up some information about it. So, the Flint water crisis began in 2014. Okay, when drinking water, which is very important, it's deadly important actually that you have good drinking water. I could go to a corner store, okay, down the street from where I live, get a bottle of Fiji water, and Fiji water is so daggone good that mess can take away headaches. You, that tells you the importance of good water and how important good water is. Like that mess can literally Fiji water is so good that mess can take away a headache, or and without even taking a Tylenol or an aspirin or something like that. So in 2014, in the city of Flint, Michigan, the local and state officials did something incredibly stupid. Okay, they changed the source of the water supply from where it was before, which was which probably wasn't even that clean. It definitely wasn't Fiji clean, but it wasn't corrosive and deadly either. They changed the source of the water from where it was before to the Flint River. The dirty, corrosive Flint River, which nobody wants to drink from. I don't know if there's a single river in America that you want to drink out of. This isn't the 1700s, before the Industrial Revolution destroyed our environment. There was a point in time in the past where you could probably drink the water from the river. That's actually where people got their water from. You know what I'm saying? That's not possible today. You'll die doing that mess in some areas. Okay, so over 100,000 people in Flint, Michigan were exposed to very high levels of lead. So they were basically poisoned. Okay? And I have a story here. I have several stories that I want to read to you guys. One is from the Huffington Post. One is from NPR. One is from the New York Times, and another one is from Detroit News. I don't know if I'm going to get through all of these articles, but these articles are all in the description box of the YouTube video. Okay, that you can either watch live right now or you can watch the replay in the future. Okay, so let me hold on one second. Give me one second. I'm retweeting some. I'm retweeting some information that I'm live right now. So that looks good. All right, we're good to go. So let me continue. So yeah, Flint, Michigan. Like I said, over 100,000 were exposed to very high levels of lead. Okay. The switch led to an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease and pneumonia. And some people think that, well, let me read this first. The Legionnaire's disease has been directly attributed to the deaths of 12 people, and it has affected 87 others. And the numbers are even probably even higher than that. I don't believe necessarily the numbers. Okay, I believe they're playing down the numbers. Because some people, I've read some articles that think that people have been diagnosed with pneumonia who actually have Legionnaires. And this isn't counting all of the children who drunk the dirty water and whose brain development and things like that might have been affected from being exposed to the corrosive lead water. So let me read this article from Huffington Post. The title of the article is "Don't Forget About Flint, Michigan." Okay, the article came out yesterday, and this was honestly the inspiration for me doing this video, or at least talking about this in today's live stream. It was written by a brother named Philip Lewis. Now, he has my last name. With the news cycle in hyperdrive ever since the inauguration of President Donald Trump, and even after that, it feels as though most Americans have forgotten about one of the most horrifying examples of government malfeasance and environmental racism in recent memory, the Flint Water Crisis. Okay, it was heartening to see the Michigan city get some attention as a result of the Will and Jaden Smith's eco-friendly water company, which has vowed to donate water to the beleaguered majority black city. But it reminded me that what happened in Flint, an hour north of my hometown of Detroit, has largely faded from the public eye. I have friends in Flint, many of whom are still wary of drinking the tap water, even with the free filters provided by the state. And they came out last year and tried to say the water was still good to drink. I wouldn't trust that. I would not trust that. Okay, because you'll start drinking the water now, and then 5 years later, 5 years down the road, 6 years down the road, you're coming down with all sorts of illnesses and diseases. And by then, they're just going to pretend they don't know what's going on, and the Flint water crisis had nothing to do with it. So I would not trust that. So the people who are wary of drinking the water still in 2018, definitely, I'm there with you. Okay. When the cameras and celebrities left, thousands of poor, now poisoned Flint residents, including infants and children, remained, and we've all but abandoned them. On April 25th, 2014, Flint officials made the cost-cutting decision to switch the city's main supply from the Detroit system, which is where, that's what I was saying earlier, that's where they were getting the water from before, Detroit, to the Flint River. Initially an effort to save $5 million. Okay, so they were being cheap. The decision proved to be more costly than they had thought, obviously. And shortly after the switch, residents started to complain about discoloration in the water, a taste of, quote, urine, and an odd smell. Rashes and hair loss were also a common complaint. There are pictures. I even have this in the live stream. Okay, if you look in the live stream and you'll see a picture of a person holding up a bottle of yellow water. Okay, yellow water, deep yellow, not like sort of beige, deep yellow water was coming out of the drains, was coming out of the fire hydrants. Okay, it was coming out of people's people's faucets. Okay, water that smelled like urine. Water that smelled like feces. This is what was being given to the people in a majority black city. And they try to pretend, first of all, and this is the scandal. This is the scandal of the Flint water crisis. They knew ahead of time that this was happening, and they didn't do anything about it. The flip occurred in 2014. They knew ahead of time because they were passing messages to each other. This is what has come out after the fact. They knew this was going on, and they continued to let it happen. You have had local officials who have been charged, but the governor, the white governor, a former governor, because he stepped down, Rick Snyder, nothing is happening to him. He's being protected. So you have these local officials, okay, falling on their swords whether they want to or not, being held accountable for a decision that was made at a state level, not just a local level. Nobody is rushing to the, oh man, mm, I'm getting heated. I'm getting really upset. Just the more and more I'm reminded of this story. Okay, the anger that I had in 2016 is just coming back. So let me continue with the article. The river water was dangerously corrosive to the city's pipes, so much so that a General Motors plant stopped using it because it was eroding car parts. That's how poisonous and corrosive this water was. It was eroding metal and aluminum, which is a metal. So over a year later, researchers found evidence of dangerously high levels of lead in the water, which finally prompted the city to take action. While we won't see the long-term health effects on a city filled with lead poisoned individuals for another 10 to 20 years, some side effects of the contaminated water have already occurred. An outbreak of Legionnaire's disease, which I mentioned earlier, caused by the water crisis, has killed a dozen people. A study discovered a, quote, horrifyingly large increase in fetal deaths and miscarriages in Flint in recent years. So babies dying in the womb, not even being born. That's gone up. Flint is one of Michigan's poorest and blackest cities. People of color represent 57% of the population and were the primary victims of a system that failed them. Would this have happened in a predominantly white suburb? Hell no. Now, this does go on in other parts of the country. I don't know. I would have to check to pull up the research to see the levels of lead, but dirty water is a problem all over the country because America's infrastructure, quite frankly, is trash. America's infrastructure is garbage. And that kind of plays into the next story I'm going to be talking about about the Miami bridge collapse. But even with that case, that's a bad story because it's just a sad story. But then too, that was new architecture, that was new infrastructure. You know, so this is showing the relationship between the people of Rio de Janeiro, and the people of Flint. The stories are different because one is a story of environmental racism and government negligence, which I believe is somewhat deliberate. I'm not saying that they deliberately poisoned the population, but they knew ahead of time what was going on and they didn't act on it. So even if you want to say that they didn't deliberately poison the people and they didn't deliberately know that all of this was going to happen, even after they knew it was happening, they didn't move fast enough, then they kind of drug their feet. Which is why people are in trouble right now, which is why Governor Rick Snyder should be charged with something. Okay, but this is showing the relationship between the people of Rio and the people of Flint. The people of Rio, and even a story I'm not talking about, but the people of Ferguson. And how black people, regardless of the country you're talking about, are facing a lot of the same problems. We have more in common than we realize. Yes, we have differences, like I said, language and culture and things like that, but we have a lot in common too. So let me see if there's anything else from this article that I want to read. Give me 1 second. I'm scanning the article because I have 3 other articles that I want to touch on. Let me read the last paragraph, then I'm going to go to the next article. The hectic and often outrageous news cycle has desensitized us to such a degree that the poisoning of an American city in the 2000s is almost an afterthought. Just because it didn't happen in New York, Washington, or Hollywood doesn't mean these citizens' problems are less important. So there's the class dynamic coming into this. The class and the racial dynamic. The city has fallen out of the headlines, but don't forget, Flint hasn't had clean water for more than 1,400 days. They still haven't replaced all those damn pipes. We have money to funnel to billionaires. You have Congress passing laws. Doug Jones, who everybody was cheering, even me, happy that he beat Roy Moore in Alabama. But you have these Democrats colluding with these Republicans to pass more deregulation, more bank deregulation in Washington. You have billions of dollars being given to the military. It's like the Tupac line, the Tupac verse from Keep Your Head Up. We have money for wars but can't feed the poor. We have money for wars but can't fund the right pipes in Flint, Michigan. This is disgusting. This is absolutely disgusting. But let me continue. We owe it to the city's residents to keep talking about it, and the government owes it to them to continue to do something about it. So that's the article from Philip Lewis, who's an editor at the Huffington Post. So in research for this article, I was looking at some other recent articles about Flint. And let me see which one I want to talk about first. Let me talk about this one from the New York Times. Now, this is an article from 2016, actually March 25th, 2016. So this article is a couple years old, but it's an important article. It's called "The Racism at the Heart of Flint's Crisis." Okay, an important news report makes clear the principal cause of the Flint water crisis: the state government's blatant disregard for the lives and health of poor and black residents of a distressed city. The report, released Wednesday by a task force appointed last year by Governor Rick Snyder to study how Flint's drinking water became poisoned. It became poisoned because of your decision. You don't need a study to figure out. This is what they like to do. Okay, when they fuck up, pardon my language, but when they fuck up, they like to start doing these studies and try to pretend we don't know what's going on. We have to do this long, months-long, or possibly even a year-long study to try to figure out what we already know. There's no study that needs to be done with. Let me just finish reading this. The report released Monday, okay, became about figuring out how Flint's water became poisoned by lead. Okay, makes for chilling reading. While it avoids using the word racism, obviously, because they don't want to be held accountable for their racism, it clearly identifies the central role that race and poverty play in this story. Quote, Flint residents who are majority black or African American and among the most impoverished of any metropolitan area in the United States did not enjoy the same degree of protection from the environmental and health hazards as that provided by or to other communities. Let me stop right there. That was from the report. Let me stop right there. I did a video for a live stream not too long ago about a small town, much smaller than Flint, a small town in Florida known as Africa Town. Or was it Florida? I think it was Georgia, actually. Okay, basically, the city is known as Africa Town. Okay, and again, it was a very similar story about environmental racism. You had a plant, a factory, okay, that was very close and nearby Africa Town that was literally releasing pollutants into the air, so much so that there was so much ash being released into the air by this plant, it would come down and settle on top of the roofs of the black people who lived in Africa Town, a town established by former slaves after the end of slavery in 1866. So you had these black people who had been living in this town since the end of slavery, since the 1800s. At one point in time, the town was 10,000 deep. It's now less than 3,000 people because so many people have left. Okay, because of cancer. You have a lot of people, because of the environmental racism and the environmental pollution of the area and the complete disregard by wealthy capitalists, okay, before the environment and for the people in the local area. Many of them are coming down with cancer now because of the pollutants in the water and the pollutants in the air. So Flint, Michigan is another example of this. Let me continue. Mr. Snyder, a Republican, and many Republicans in Congress have tried to deflect and minimize the state's responsibility for the Flint crisis. Let me repeat that. People have died, and many more people have been affected. They have been poisoned by the state. And you have Republicans, Snyder himself, who I want to call something. I want to say a particular word, but I don't want this video to get flagged, okay? You have Snyder, who's a Republican, and you have the Republicans in Congress protecting Snyder and deflecting and saying that the state is not responsible for what happened. Mr. Snyder has said the crisis represents a collective failure. It's a collective failure, of local, state, and federal governments. And congressional Republicans like Jason Chaffetz of Utah have sought to pin virtually all of the blame on the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which many of them oppose for ideological reasons. The task force cut through to the truth and said the agency most at fault was the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, which reports to who? Mr. Snyder. So the report that former Governor Rick Snyder basically authorized, because he authorized this report, this task force, came back and said, no, you're responsible, Mr. Well, really said the fault was the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. But they report to the governor. They report to Snyder, not the EPA. The agency failed to instruct officials in Flint, which was under state control at the time. That's another thing. That's another thing they leave out. The state government in Michigan, which at the time was being led by Snyder, actually used a law they passed. What's the name of that? Oh man, it's on the tip of my tongue. It's basically a law that a lot of these state governments, led by Republicans and led by right-wingers, they've been passing these laws on the state level all over the country that gives the states executive power to take over local governments. And they're doing this because they're seeing a lot of these local leftist governments, these local, mostly black and brown governments, passing very liberal, very progressive, very leftist laws. And they don't like that. These states don't like that. So they're coming in, passing these executive privilege, executive power laws and statutes to take over these local governments. So as this Flint crisis was going on, as this article states, the governor was literally in control of Flint. The state government was in control of Flint. The mayor of Flint, Michigan, who was a black woman at the time, if I'm not mistaken, she didn't even have control over the city itself because the city had been taken over by the state. But they want to say everybody's responsible? The fuck out of here. That is BS. That is total BS. But are they being held accountable? Just like in Rio. Hell no. They're not being held accountable. This is a human rights violation. That is how this should be. This is how the independent. I talk about the independent black media a lot. From here on out, let this be known. Okay, let this be known. From here on out, the Flint Water Crisis needs to be regarded by the independent black media as a human rights violation. That is how we need to talk about it. That is how our dialogue needs to address this. This is an attack on the human rights violation of those black people and the white people even who live in Flint, Michigan. And I believe even I don't know if it was the UN, but one of those international human rights organizations, was it Human Rights Watch? It might have been Amnesty International. One of those global human rights organizations even said as much. Said that the right to clean water is a human right. That's not a privilege. It shouldn't be. The right to clean water is a human right because it is needed to survive. You can't survive without water. The majority of your body is made up of water. If you don't drink water consistently, you can die. Oh man. Let me man. Let me let me take a breather right quick. Let me pause for a second, family, and I'm going to retweet this video. I'm going to take a few seconds to retweet this video. While I don't have any water beside me, but I need to. Man, do I need to. Whew. Give me 1 second. I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still live. Oh man, sorry. Let me continue. How long have I been going on? This stream has been going on for oh wow, over an hour. Okay. So yeah, let me get through this. Where was I? I got so caught up in that rant, I kind of lost my place. Let me see the agency. The agency continuously belittled the concerns of local residents and independent experts and lied to the EPA. They're talking about the agency that answered to Governor Snyder. Okay, so they lied to the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. They belittled local residents and were completely indignant to the concerns of independent experts, telling it that Flint was properly treating the water. That's what they were telling people. That's what they're called, emergency managers. I just saw the term. So Mr. Snyder's office comes in for harsh criticism for relying on the department's assurances that the water was safe despite mounting evidence that it was in fact poisoning residents. The emergency managers Mr. Snyder appointed to run Flint's city government decided to switch the city's water source to the Flint River from the Detroit River. So let me repeat that because this is important. The emergency managers, the people who had taken over the local government, Mr. Snyder appointed to run Flint city government, decided themselves to switch the city's water source to the Flint River from the Detroit water system and later refused requests by the residents and the city council to reverse that decision because it would cost more money. Oh, man. All of these people need to be in prison, or at least charged with like you like. Let me just continue. Let me continue. Actually, no. That's mostly it for that article. And if you want to read that article, like I said, the title of the article is "The Racism at the Heart of Flint's Crisis." Okay. Actually, no, let me read the last paragraph. I was just reading something from this article. I'm going to read the last paragraph, then I'm going to go to the last article about this story, then I'm going to move on to the last story. Congress, which has refused to invest sufficiently in the nation's public works and has been antagonistic to the environmental protections, must also learn from the crisis. For years, poor and minority communities have suffered disproportionately from environmental degradation. Examples include the poorest neighborhoods of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. That's another example. And the breach of the levees in that city. Communities in West Virginia that faced chemical spills, and even Washington, D.C., which had its own lead contamination crisis about 10 years ago. Most of these disasters could have been avoided or mitigated by aggressive government action. And even this isn't mentioned in the article because this is from 2016. Even when you look at the what were they called, the DACA protest, with what's happening with Native Americans, okay, and how they were protesting. They wanted to prevent their water supply from being contaminated, and guess what happened? There was an oil spill. There might have been multiple oil spills in that same area that the DACA pro. Nah, hold on. Let me pull that up. I'm getting my protest mixed up. Hold on one second. Do. No, yeah, not DACA. I'm completely. I apologize. It's not DACA. I completely misspoke. I'm getting the protest mixed up. No DAPL. That was the hashtag, not DACA. DACA is something completely different. DACA is regarding immigration. It was the No DAPL protest and the Dakota Access Pipeline protest. Okay, and it was on the Sioux Reservation. So that you can include that the Standing Rock protest. You can include that. That's also an example of environmental racism. Okay, so whether you're talking about No DAPL and Standing Rock, and let me see Standing Rock. Let me see how many oil spills there's been. Let me see oil spill. Yep. Yep, I knew it. I knew it. From CNN and National Geographic from last year, November of last year, 2017. Keystone Pipeline spills 200 gallons of oil. And the CNN article, Keystone Pipeline leaks 210 gallons of oil. So they protested at Standing Rock the oil pipeline that Hillary Clinton was very tepid in saying anything about. And Trump definitely didn't say anything about. And Trump, I think, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, he was invested in that company. Okay, the company that was doing the pipeline. Okay, so you had a lot of people, even Obama's reaction was very weak. A lot of these politicians, their reaction was piss poor. Okay? They protested the spilling of oil because they didn't want their native lands destroyed. And guess what happened? Over 200 gallons of oil spilled on their land. We live in a country that does not give a damn about the environment. And actually, it's gotten worse under Trump. Trump is going around selling off, not reservations. He's selling off land, like land that was set aside for parks and things like that. He's selling these lands off so people can drill there. This is just terrible. So I went off completely on a different issue. This last article that I want to read about Flint, the title of the article is Snyder Partly to Blame for Flint Crisis, University of Maryland report says. This article is a recent article. So the last article I read was from 2016. Okay. This article, I just got deep on Periscope. This article, well, deep for me. Deep not for a lot of other people, but it's deep for me. This article came out yesterday from the Detroit News. Snyder partly to blame for Flint crisis, which that's been known for years now. That's not new news. So let me read the article. Governor Rick Snyder is partly to blame for the Flint water crisis for failing to ensure a rigorous investigation by state agencies and for not declaring an emergency sooner. According to a new report by the the University of Michigan. Okay, the declaration from the University of Michigan's School of Public Health also casts criticism on the Flint Department of Environmental Quality for failing to notify the public of Legionnaire's disease outbreak and refusing to cooperate with the Genesee County Health Department investigation. The report funded by the that's why I thought about Maryland. See, I was reading this article last night. I knew Maryland was in here somewhere, but it wasn't the University of Maryland. The report was funded by the Bethesda, Maryland-based Beaumont Foundation. So it was founded by a foundation based in Maryland. Okay, but the actual study was done by the University of Michigan. 5 public health lawyers in the Network for Public Health Law said the governor, quote, bears significant legal responsibility for his role over the state agencies in charge of protecting public health. The governor had adequate legal authority to intervene by demanding more information from agency directors, reorganizing agencies to assure availability of appropriate expertise where needed, ordering state agencies to respond, or ultimately firing ineffective agency heads, the report stated. But he abjured either due to ignorance or willful neglect of duty. The complaints from Flint's residents were, quote, not hidden from the governor. So the governor knew about the complaints. This is pissing me off. The governor knew about the complaints. He had the emergency managers take over the city government in Flint. So the state was in control of the city government in Flint because they didn't want a bunch of black people running their own town. Let's keep it real. Let's tell it like it is. They didn't want a bunch of black liberals, bunch of black progressives controlling a city and passing progressive policy, potentially. So they took over the city, installed these dictatorial emergency managers, and then tried to sit back and pretend they didn't know what the hell was going on. And I'm honestly thinking, and people might call this a conspiracy theory, but if it's a conspiracy theory, it is founded in data. It is founded in fact. I'm partially wondering if this was done intentionally. Like literally, I'm seriously thinking about if this was some deliberate diabolical shit that they had going on in Flint as some sort of test run. At this point, you can't rule it out. I mean, yeah, you can say you don't know what their agenda was. We don't know that. But we know that they knew what was going on. They knew there was a problem. They knew there were complaints. And the state was in control of the local government. That all of those things are facts. Just so you know. So, let me tone it down because I'm yelling. Let me tone it down. Where was I? I lost track. The city's water crisis occurred from April 2014 to October 2015 when Flint's water source was switched to corrosive water. So we already know that. Let me see. I'm skipping down to the next paragraph. Researchers believe the water conditions also contributed to the growth of deadly Legionella bacteria, causing a 2-year outbreak of Legionnaire's disease cases in the Genesee County area. The report also took to task the emergency managers' roles in the crisis as they, quote, undermined the local government's ability to respond to an emerging crisis. Once the emergency manager took over, city agencies could no longer act. Although state, federal, and county agencies retained legal authority to intervene. The report comes as State Attorney General Bill Chouette pursues involuntary manslaughter charges against Health and Human Services Director Nick Lyon and State Medical Executive Eden Wells. Preliminary hearings for Lyon and Wells are underway and are expected to wrap soon. Snyder needs to be there. Not there in the audience. He needs to be there on trial. So, I'm not going to read the rest of the article. All of these articles, like I said, are linked in my YouTube video. All of the articles can be clicked on and can be read in full at your discretion.